Welcome to Revive Ministries Podcast. Today, we continue to focus on finding freedom through adversity, maintaining healing. And it sounds counterintuitive. A lot of us don't like to go through adversity, but sometimes, from my experience, the biggest steps come from those moments. Maintaining and healing also reminds me of the consistency approach we have to sometimes may take in life. But I have a guest. Well, she's from the UK, I believe, but she's in Australia right now. I just want to welcome Hanna. Thank you for joining me and this discussion. You know, the time zone thing is kind of interesting. I'm kind of used to it because my wife now, she was in Korea teaching before she came back last year. So it is, but I am thankful that you're willing to share and have the dialogue with us. Welcome, Hanna.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. It's really good to be here, and I'm glad that we found a time the two of us.
It's weird because it's morning and it's night for you. It's one of those things that you're like, what's going on? But I want to share with those, like I share with everyone, that disclaimer: if you're in crisis, please seek appropriate professional help. The hotline in the United States is 1-800-273-8255. I encourage each and everyone listening, watching, to find out what resources are available in your area. Hanna, I don't know if you heard some of my podcasts. I always start off with a quote. That's my, because I know I always say this, even though I talk a lot, is someone said it better than I did. And that's always the case. So I read enough books to realize that really quick. This is from George Bernard Shaw. He says, two things define you: your patience when you have nothing, your attitude when you have everything. Interesting. What comes to mind when you hear this?
Yeah, well, what comes to mind for me when I hear that quote is that it makes it really clear that in your life you will have both nothing and everything.
Yeah.
Which reminds me of a concept within mindfulness and kind of the field of contemplative practices in general, known as the law of impermanence. I don't know if this is something you're familiar with, Robert, or your listeners, but put simply, it's everything changes.
Yes.
Nothing forever.
Yeah.
So life is full of ups and downs, highs and lows, and will always be full of highs and lows. Now, that doesn't mean that every low will be as bad as the last one. In actual fact, this concept, if you can get your head around it, is really restorative and reassuring during those difficult times. It can be incredibly soothing and kind of restorative, as I say. So it can help you to have even more patience, like the quote says.
Yes.
To allow those rough patches to run their natural course and to pass by, which they will.
Yeah. You know, I do like the one constant in life is change. And Albert Einstein said it this way: the measure of intelligence is the ability to change. Change is a lot of times the key noting fact, because I feel for me, change is inevitable, but our ability to adapt to it is what kind of defines who we become. You know, becoming is, I joke, but we're not human doings. We're human beings. We become something else, and it's this constant change that kind of breeds that. Patience when you have nothing reminds me of my own adversity and recovery. I find little healing happens. I do facilitate groups and for support groups. I feel little healing when everyone focuses on what they don't have, versus what they do have. There's something about being grateful for what you have, gratitude. You did mention mindfulness. I actually have done that quite a bit. I also do FIT. I don't know, the tapping, freedom. I've been doing that just because I suffer from trauma, so I have to go through all that process, and it has been helpful. Well, there's a lot of, one thing about recovery is it's not cookie cutter. It's different for every individual. So I did EMDR therapy for several weeks a couple of years ago, and it was useful. But it's not just one thing, and that's the point. And Hannah, what I want to ask you, what ways have you seen or experienced personally that adversity played a role of a person's own freedom? We don't think of adversity as freedom giving, but it is in a weird way, can be. So what would you like to share there?
Yeah, it seems like a strange counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Well, in mindfulness, we intentionally bring adversity center stage. So when it's there, of course, we're not trying to pluck difficult times. Mindfulness is really all about noticing and experiencing whatever's going on at the moment for you, whatever's happening. And the thing is, as humans, we have a tendency to resist anything negative, don't we?
Yeah.
The difficulties, the challenges, the uncomfortable thoughts and feelings. And you're anything like me, when you resist or bury these difficulties, they don't get with. And sometimes they even get bigger and bigger, or they morph into something worse.
Yeah.
There's some great research that kind of supports this fact that avoidance or kind of aversion our adversities, these kind of tactics actually have more damaging long-term results in your health and well-being. So when I work with people, I very gently invite them to do the opposite. So to counterintuitive and go against all natural tendencies to avoid, instead open up to difficulties. And I should say this is done very gently, as I say, and carefully after some preliminary kind of building blocks.
Yeah, of course.
Anyone kind of dives in there into their difficulties without guidance from an instructor or a therapist. But in answer to your question, I've seen again and again how this turning towards adversity actually allows you to see it for what it is and to stand it a bit better, which provides space and clarity to deal with it in more tactful ways. So absolutely seems counterintuitive, but turning towards adversity truly does open those doors to freedom.
I've seen many a times among my peers and those when someone says like they focus on something, it's usually not about this, it's about that. I've seen that a lot. It's what I mean by that, there's a lot of deflection when things are ruminating and you don't allow yourself to process emotions. That's why I have to do the tapping, because I have a bad tendency of just burying things down deep, because that's my comfort. It's easier to avoid, but then, like you said, it morphs into something else. It could be socially. Maybe I have these social triggers that I wouldn't normally understand because I never addressed the feeling of loneliness or the feeling of being left out or whatever it is. Because some of the I took a lot of when I was in uni, I went to, we had a lot of math, and one of the things we used to do is derivatives, and I try to find what the derivative of what I'm feeling is. A lot of times it's all this clutter in the front. It's like, oh, it's this, it's this person, but really it's just like, I'm sad. That's it. I'm sad. I feel shame. I feel guilty. One person I read, among our anger, one of the first things they say about anger is, it's okay to be angry, but anger in itself is like not emotion. It's a reaction to another emotion. But what someone was telling me, like, I feel fear, so I respond in anger. Anger itself is a response to emotion. That's what I was reading from some of the studies, and I found that intriguing because a lot of times we feel like anger, it's all it's up, but I feel it's too general because there's a lot of reasons that make us angry at that point. But I do like the idea of what I find, like, just like gratitude, being grateful for what you have, but also addressing in mindfulness, at least the way I was shown, was I'm the observer of whatever I'm doing. Like I pull
Yeah.
myself back and I'm an observer and I put no judgment and I look at it and I kind of like I let myself ruminate. Obviously, it's different situations, but it's personally catered to the individual himself, but or her himself, because it just allows you to address something that you don't normally would address, or you would say you won't have time, or you don't see any value. But what we're talking about today in this month of finding freedom is that there is freedom of knowing, of addressing these emotions that a lot of times are, let's just be honest, they're messy. And a lot of times
Yeah.
socially and culturally, it's hard to see. It's harder to see your loved ones in pain sometimes than yourself. So like it's kind of this hard balance. And I want to talk about the second part of George Bernard Shaw's quote: your attitude when you have everything. It reminds me, Mental Health Awareness Month is in May. This is going to be posted in July. Remembering is a big thing. I know when I was in the UK, I worked there in the summer. I'm getting used to the words like schedule and everything like that. I'm not used to saying things like that. But one thing I was interesting is you look at the calendar, no matter what country it is, it's dotted up with all these things we have to remember. And when we're doing well, it's easy to forget. I was joking with my wife. It hasn't been a year, and I forgot how it was to be single. You forget so easily. Like we're so bad as human beings, and in our recovery is the same thing. You forget those bad times, but there's a lot of wealth of knowledge of remembering. I want to ask you. There's a lot of uncertainty with COVID-19. It's everywhere, and I know. I just want to ask you. What lessons do you want to remember? Later when you look back at this moment, because everyone's looking at COVID-19 in different ways. It's affecting people in different ways. What would you like to, because I think I've learned a lot of lessons of slowing down, put in boundaries. People are at home. I was working at Home and First. Now I got a new position. It's still time management. It's about saying, okay, I'm setting my boundaries here, respecting your own self-care and your own time to kind of balance that out. What have you learned, or what would you like to remember moving forward?
Yeah, it's so true that we're so forgetful, isn't it? And our brains are kind of quick to adapt, as you were alluding to the new norm, and can be in our favor, definitely. If we're recovering from a traumatic life event, this kind of quick adaptation helps us to come to terms with things and adjust to norm. So it can be in our favor, but it does also mean that we're at risk of missing these kind of big life lessons that have long-term benefits. Yes, the pandemic, I think we probably all feel it's a really great opportunity for some long-term change. And what we've seen quickly, certainly what I've observed, and everyone that I speak to, is the importance of social connections. What things like shopping and holidaying and eating out or whatever it might be, they're missed. But it's our friends and family and working with a team and all of these micro connections that we have throughout the day that is really missed most of all. So and these are the things that we tend to take for granted as well. These social connections we tend to take for granted, and actually for most of us in Western societies, socialized to believe that it's everything other than people that make us happy. Money and status and belongings that equate to happiness. And we don't need to question that unless you have gone on some sort of kind of personal development, sort of looking, or spiritual path, or meditation, whatever it might be, when you've done some of that work looking inwards. You don't question that. We just assume it's so ingrained in us, in conscious. So we do tend to think in terms of bigger and better things equal happiness.
Yeah.
And something the pandemic seems to have done, and I guess we'll watch this space, but seems to have woken us up as a society to this importance of other people for our happiness. So I hope that it leaves that legacy.
I hope so too.
And put more focus on social connections and
It
communities.
was funny. I think it was April of 2020. I went to a store and I felt so stressed. The line was a bit long, like the casual just going to the store and just popping in to get something. I felt it. So social connections is huge. And one thing that I found intriguing was I facilitate a support group for NAMI, National Alliance for Mental Illness. I'm a facilitator. And I pushed for the virtual support group. Now, there's positives and negatives of that because some people don't like it. Literally, people I've been, friends with, like working with, they literally said, never going to happen. Never going to happen. That's all they said. I would. So for me, I felt some, back and forth. One thing you mentioned a little bit was I feel like when you talk about holistic recovery, when you talk about all this stuff, I'd never proselytized with the faith, but I would say Viktor Frankl, I read the book, Man Finding Meaning, and I felt that was very telling. When you know the why, I'm paraphrasing, when you know the why in life, the how gets bearable. And I think purpose-driven recovery, purpose-driven life is a lot more, more sustainable because like you said, things change, ebb and flow. It's a why do we do what we do? Question a little bit deeper. I know some people they're like, oh, I can never believe in that stuff, but you believe in something because the point is, we do need each other more than we like to admit, and that's basically the thing we learned in COVID-19. We used to kind of be like so cavalier, like, oh, I could do, but at the same time, I know for one thing that one of my guests came, and she's a good friend of mine. She worked in New York City as a social worker, and she said that some of the homeless community, one of the person was homeless for over a couple decades. And he asked her, now he's back. He has a home, and with Maslow's hierarchy of need, you got the base, the fundamental needs, and you got the safety and security, healthy relationships, all that stuff, all good. But one thing that was interesting, he asked, what was the hardest thing being homeless for 2 decades in New York City? And she was naming everything she learned in school. But really, he said, no, loneliness. That was it.
Yeah.
Loneliness. And I thought that was very telling because a lot of us would say, well, getting a hot meal. I feel like one of the quotes I used in another previous episode was, there's a difference between the house and the home. There's a difference. You can have a big, nice house, but you don't feel it's a home. There's a difference, an element when it comes to that. I feel healthy relationships, in Maslow's hierarchy, that's where sometimes, if you don't have that solid foundation, sometimes we get desperate. Sometimes our only if statements, our value all puts into a person when we never really look inward about ourselves, and knowing that, I'm going to make mistakes. And so is she. Like when we idolize people and that kind of, it provides maybe, how can I say this, a toxic environment. It's not us doing, it's us becoming and having this safe place to do it. One of the things I made this Revive Ministries, I was doing it face-to-face before COVID and events, but I also started this podcast October 2019. I'm over 100 episodes. Like March, I did I hit 100 episodes, and for me, it was just because I was annoyingly consistent, and I kind of knew the why. My friends used to joke with me I'm trying to be like Mr. Rogers. I was in the military. I'm trying to provide a safe place because that's the whole thing. I found more healing happens when people are allowed to talk. Because I think sometimes, with everything, I never get political, with all the polarizing thoughts, is that we can't be around people that think differently than us. And I feel like that in itself is a disadvantage because it's not, for me, you learn a lot from the people who don't agree with you. But now we're saying, no, I cannot even talk to or be around them. I feel that in itself is something that for me, I'm learning, and I have learned. And I feel that in itself has made an impact in my recovery, because a lot of times I didn't agree, but it doesn't change the way I value you or value me. There's a difference from shame and guilt that I feel, at least how I use the words is different. Guilt, I feel bad I did something. Shame is like, I feel bad I did something, and now I'm less because of that. There's like a causal effect. So that's just a word play. I used this quote before. I want you to kind of lamented on this, but it's, the major value in life is not what you get. The major value in life is what you become, Jim Rohn. I think that's amazingly true, because things don't always last. What, maybe you have the capital, but I've seen people, health is a big issue, obviously with COVID, but like other health conditions, or unexpected conditions, where unexpected events, like car accident. My friend was in a car accident and was in a coma for over a decade. So there's things that you don't even know that could affect us. So not to get all paranoid, but I feel that's where the gratitude comes in, and that's where the priority and redirecting of oneself. I want to ask you, I'm sorry, I remember this, and I mentioned that, but I wanted your thoughts on all this. I know there's a lot of threads and a lot of things tying up together, but they all intersect in how we see adversity in our lives, and how we go about it. Do we run away? Do we run to the hills? Do we say, "Oh, COVID-19 is so bad, I'm gonna go away," or is it not that? Is it just us trying to reevaluate our priorities? What thoughts through our conversation would you like to share?
So just reflecting on that quote, the major value in life is not what
I'll
you
put
get.
it back up.
Value in life is what you become.
Yeah.
I think that sums up really nicely what I was trying to say before. We have a habit of thinking about happiness as something that will come in the future, normally after we achieve this or we have that. So you can detect this happen even at kind of subtle levels. We all do it, it's human nature. So if you think about something going on in your life at the moment, or something that's happened recently, when you had that feeling that once this is done, I'll be okay, or I'll be happy, or I'll be back to normal, some version of this. It might be finishing a project at work. Like you said, Robert, it might be changing a job. It might be moving house. It might be finishing a DIY project. It could be big or small, but we tend to have this tendency to, or this mentality, I suppose, that we've achieved this, everything will be okay. But what we normally find is any relief or boost in our happiness is short-lived, because next thing comes along. That's the nature of our complicated lives as humans. So hinging our happiness on something for the future that's reliant on external factors, things that we can buy or get, risky strategy. And the quote actually reminds me of that. But I'd like to add to it, if I may, Robert. I've made a little note here for an addition to the quote. So I would add, so the quote says, the major value in life is what you become. I would add that value in life is in being itself as well. We're experiencing right now, life right now. And you mentioned a lovely kind of phrase earlier, that we're human beings, not human doings. I really love that. Kind of sums up the addition to this quote for me.
I love that you said, it promotes the idea of being present today. Being present today. And what I say to a lot of people, every day cannot be a crisis. However, when you question it deeper than superficial, you begin to realize that's not sustainable. Like, I talk to like my peers, like sometimes there's crisis situations and then there's numbers professionals to talk to. But there's a difference between living your life and maintaining it. I do put maintaining and healing, but when I use the context of maintaining, I'm talking about being consistent of your approach. But there's a difference between that and living your life. Recovery is different for everyone. I know people who just want to be heard. This is why I love this platform, because there's no judgment, because no one can say what works for you because it's different. I know someone who maybe they like, they like Dungeons and Dragons. As a kid, I used to play it a little bit when I learned, but at the same time, what makes you happy? Like for me, I know there's balance and all that stuff, but sometimes we get so regiment. Only if I do this, I'll be happy. I take this and all this stuff, but then even with medicine, people think of mental health medicine or all that stuff as kind of mysterious, but at the same time, it's a combination of everything together. And even with physical medicines per se, it doesn't always work. Some people like to go the natural route. There's a lot of possibilities there, and the holistic approach I found more useful because it really focuses on the individual itself. And I feel that puts who back in the seat. I would say it puts the person who's suffering back in the seat. I remember when I was sick, first thing I wanted to know was, what is wrong with me? And then one thing about stigma that's funny is that you find out what's wrong with you, and then you say, I'm no longer Robert, I am that. So that is who I am now. Now there's seasons of recovery, and then you circle around, you get better at coping. Then you're like, no, I am not that, I am Robert. It's funny, you start off trying to find answers elsewhere. I want to ask you, I want to give you an opportunity. Obviously we shared a lot. What ways have you found freedom, and how have you maintained your healing today? Hannah, anything you would like to share to those listening?
Thank you. Yeah, so these days I'm a mindfulness and well-being instructor, but I didn't always live a mindful life. I guess first 6 years of my adult life, after finishing my degree and starting out in the world of work, I was pretty miserable. I felt like life was a constant struggle. Pretty miserable. And what I didn't know at the time, and I wouldn't have labeled it in this way, I thought that this was just life, but I was struggling with anxiety. That's what it was, experiencing constant self-criticism, rumination about things I'd said or done, over-preparing for things, overthinking everything, catastrophizing, coming up, being filled with a constant sense of dread and overwhelm, and it all impacted my sleep. So, lots of these symptoms going on. I expect that these symptoms are quite familiar to some of those listening, especially at the moment during a pandemic, which is, a really natural response to a very real threat. So I was suffering from anxiety, and that was until I discovered mindfulness and started to use it to really retrain my mind and the negative thoughts and ways of responding to stress in life that were really keeping me stuck in that state of anxiety. I did a lot of mindfulness practice and meditation and learning about my mind, and slowly things started to change. So slowly my repetitive self-chatter softened and quietened. Learned ways to respond to unpleasant emotions in better ways so that they didn't trigger a bout of worry or catastrophizing. And I started to tune into how my body was kind of contributing to all of this as well, because sometimes your body makes you feel more tense or worked up. It joins in and creates this kind of vicious cycle of body, thoughts, and emotions. So I learned how to reduce that as well and tame that. And eventually my anxiety dissolved and I was able to start enjoying life again.
Yeah.
Fast forward to, and in answer to your maintenance question, I still meditate every day, and I include kind of more informal practices of mindfulness throughout my day as well. I guess generally living mindfully. And I'm now retrained and launched a wellbeing business so that I can help others benefit from the techniques of mindfulness in the same way. Because when I realized you don't have to live, don't have to have this constant worrying inner dialogue, I became really passionate to help others to free themselves from that as well.
That's wonderful. People ask me, before, why do you do all this? And I said, because helping people became my healing. Serving people became my recovery. That was it. One thing, I will get all the information about your well-being business, all that stuff. It'll be in the notes for those who are listening. What I want to also say is, I myself, I do mindfulness. My therapist has shown me I do progressive relaxation. I told you I dealt with it. I've done. I have to be intentional of my approach, because I know a funny story, and I told this before. Me and my wife got married in September 2020, last year, not that long. The funny thing was, we went to Key West, right, in the middle of this stuff, right. We went snorkeling, and I get panic attacks, and I just remember, the water doesn't bother me, but funny enough, of all days, a school of jellyfish were coming, and we're out there in the water. Now we call it the jellyfish, the attack of the jellyfish. Now to this day for our honeymoon, but anyway, I'm telling my wife, I'm like, Joanne, I'm telling her because I was the first one, and I was like, I saw them come in. Funny enough, I get back. I have a panic attack. I did not get stung. My wife got stung a lot. Unfortunately, like a lot of people did. But the guy who was the captain, and I was in the U.S. Air Force in 2000, 2004. I served in the U.S. Air Force, and he was too. He was in the Air Force, so he was just really quick. He was quick to respond. A lot of times, people see people with a panic attack, they kind of panic themselves, and it doesn't help the situation. But he made me concentrate on his voice, kind of made me help me breathe, got me what I needed, and literally it dissolved real quick. One thing I want to say, obviously I've been learning, but it was nice to have that guided professional help at that moment. One person told me it this way, especially with PTSD, it's a fight or flight response. So like if you're out in the woods and there's a bear and you have this reaction, it's a survival mechanism. But what if you see the bear when you're at home, when you wake up? You're not in the forest anymore. That's kind of what it is detrimental, because physically, because the cortisol and all that stuff that gets overproduced in yourself, and it harms you physically. So I do appreciate you mentioning mindfulness and your meditation. Those things do help, because the levels of how stressed we are do affect how our physical and our whole outlook and well-being. I don't want to share one.
And if any listeners want to find out more about how I help people, feel free to check out my website. I know you link to it as well, Robert. So it's alittle.mindful.com, and I actually have a course on there specifically for anxiety. So if that's something you're interested in, you can try it for free, see if it feels like it's for you, or subscribe to my emails. I send out a free well-being practice every couple of weeks. So, like you say, there's different modes of recovery for everyone, but it's mindfulness, and that space is something that you're interested in, do check it out.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Hannah, for sharing all your insight with us. It's just nice to know that it's recovery doesn't just look one way. There's not one
Mm,
way, and I feel that a little of this, little of that has extremely helped me in my recovery and helping others. Like we said, I think both of us could say has helped us too. So, with that being said,
absolutely.
I want to share with those who are watching. Remember to stay updated with Revive Ministries and reviveministriesfl.com is our website. We're on Facebook and Instagram. This is goodbye from Revive Ministries, leaving you with this last quote. It's from J.K. Rowling, for all those people who love Harry Potter. She reads, numbing the pain for a while will make it worse when you finally feel it.